You don't have to go around hungry. There's food in this house of God. And the thing about being in church, sometimes you're being fed in ways that you don't even recognize until the moment of your trial comes. But you ought to hang out in this place where God's glory abides. You ought to allow the consciousness of the Spirit to make its way deep into your heart. And in that moment when you find yourself in a tight spot, you'll discover that you were more nurtured and more nourished than you imagined, because something deep down inside of you will give you the strength that you need. There was this brother who wrote an editorial for the op-ed section of a British newspaper. He said, "I'm not so sure it makes sense to go to church." He said, "I've been going to church for about 30 years, and I have listened to no less than 3,000 sermons. But to my consternation," he said, "I can barely remember 5 sermons in 30 years. I'm not so sure those sermons did me any good. I don't really remember any of them. I don't remember the text. I don't remember the title. Why have I been going to church for 30 years? And so it stirred up a lot of controversy, and somebody else wrote the same newspaper in response to the man's letter. And he said, "You know what? I've been married for 30 years. And during that time, I've eaten 32,850 meals. Most of them were cooked by my wife, and I can't remember much about any of them. But I am sure that I received nourishment from every one of them. Matter of fact, I think had I stopped eating, I would have starved to death." I'm trying to tell you that even in ways that you don't recognize, that when you are in the presence, I wish I had some help, of the living God, sometimes it's in the sermon, but it's not always in the sermon. The best sermon is sitting next to you. The best sermon is on your row. It's that person who went through cancer and they look well, but you don't know what they've been through. You see their big hat, you see their fancy suit, but you don't know that they had to go through chemotherapy. You don't know that they had to go through crying. You don't know that they had to go through a divorce. You don't know the person who's wrestling with depression. You don't know the person who's wondering, where is my child? And yet they make their way to the house of the living God Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. Because they have learned to say with the psalmist, "One thing have I desired, and that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple." Oh, when you hang out in God's house, you'll discover that there's beauty even in an ugly situation. If you hang out in God's house, you'll discover that you've been nourished by the word in ways that you do not even recognize until you come to the time of trial. Sometimes you have to go through the darkness to discover that the Lord is your light and your salvation. Whom shall you fear? Sometimes you have to be weak to know that the Lord is the strength of your life. Of whom shall you be afraid? Sometimes you have to be lonely to know that he will never leave you nor forsake you. It's when my enemies sought to destroy me that all of a sudden I realized that the word was deep in my heart, and he would make my enemies my footstool. I went through a bad situation, and I thought I had not received much nourishment from church, but everybody around me was losing their mind. Everybody around me was about to drink and drug themselves to death because they were going through a bad situation. But somewhere in God's house, I heard some preacher, I heard some deacon, I heard some mother, I heard some sister say, don't worry that you're going through a bad thing. All things work together for the good unto those who love God and who are called according to his purpose.